the Commission on the changing of the clocks. Mrs. Bulc, you are here. Let me give you the floor directly.
Honourable members of the Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, your request and today's opportunity to debate on EU summertime arrangements is very timely. The Commission regularly receives questions about the time switch, including from members of the European Parliament. Some of those doubt the need to switch time. As the Commission committed to before this House, my services have reassessed all available evidence. This includes the very balanced and complete overview made by the European Parliament's research services. The evidence is conclusive only on one point. Letting Member States free to apply uncoordinated time changes would be detrimental for the internal market. I am therefore against such a solution, whether that means simply repealing the directive or allowing individual Member States to opt out of a harmonised regime. Conversely, the findings are inclusive on human health. Some people seem to suffer from the twice-yearly changes, but this might be well compensated by the positive health effects induced by increased leisure and outdoor activities. And it is unclear whether permanent summertime or wintertime would be better for the human biorhythm. While I am open to consider the summertime issues further, I would like to stress an important point. There are two options that would allow for a continued harmonised approach. First, stop time changes for all Member States by amending the directive, or leave the summertime rules unchanged. If one were to select the first option, it would also have to be established when to abolish time changes, after the last change to wintertime or after the last change to summertime. We discussed the summertime issues at the last TT Council in December at the request of one Member State. I explicitly invited all ministers to let me know if any of them were in favour of changing the status quo. Apart from one Member State that put the question on the agenda, nobody has done so until now. Today it is your turn. I very much look forward to the forthcoming debate and welcome that the vote on the resolution will give the Parliament the opportunity to voice its opinion in this matter. I am sure it will give rise to valuable elements for reflection. All the more since the success of any potential Commission proposals intended to modify the current rules by definition depends on the stance taken by the co-legislators. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame. La parole.
Thank you very much. And let me now give the floor to Mr. Swoboda on behalf of the group EPP.
President, Commissioner, 100.
To ukazuje naléhavost tohoto problému. Paní profesorka Merov, chronobiologička, nám tady v Evropském parlamentu na hearingu řekla, že existuje 20%.
Traduction dans plusieurs langues, en tout cas le français, déjà? Dans toutes les langues. Veuillez patienter un petit instant.
There seems to be a technical issue. Could you just wait a moment?
I begin from the beginning, yeah?
On va tout recommencer.
Yes, restart.
President, Commissioner, there are hundreds of petitions from national states, many national initiatives. Every year we have at least one oral question about this issue, so it clearly shows how urgent this problem is. Mrs. Merlov, a chronologist who participated in a hearing in the European Parliament, told us clearly that 20% of our people suffer from health issues, and 80% of our population, on the other hand, don't believe that these people are suffering from these issues. Guy Rennenberg from Munich, another scientist, talks about social jet lag caused by the daylight saving time, that it basically leads to a higher consumption of alcohol, tobacco, to depression, obesity, diabetes, as well as metabolic problems. There are estimates concerning direct and indirect costs. Apparently, they reach 1% of GDP of the EU. We don't know why this regime exists at all. There are no conclusive results. There are no clear energy savings. There is no clear increase in sports activities, for example, either. I'm very glad that you mentioned a review of this directive, which means that the proposals of my colleague Bellad are not necessary anymore. So, on behalf of those 20% of our citizens, I call upon the Commission to use their legislative activities. Thank you.
Mrs. Ayasen.
Pour 1 minute 30.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President, and welcome to you, Madam Commissioner. Well, it's true. We all agree in general that there is something that exists called jet lag that people know about when they travel from one continent to another. We know that you can get very tired from jet lag and it's difficult to manage, but the clock changes in the spring and in the autumn is maybe a kind of mini jet lag, but ultimately it does affect the health of the most vulnerable in society, such as children and then the elderly. But for us in the Transport Committee, it's very important because there are people who are falling victim to road accidents which are caused by fatigue and also because of the clock change in the winter, but also in the spring, because in the spring there is a difference which causes insomnia, and then that can cause in turn fatigue on the roads. It's also important to study this. We understand that there could be benefits in terms of energy efficiency, and for us as countries interested in tourism, we understand that there could be improvements there. Now, in my country, the different timetables are very difficult for people to reconcile, and family life is difficult to manage as well, so that needs to be assessed in Spain, irrespective of the clock changes. But anyway, Commissioner, I'm very happy that this is back on the agenda. I do think it needs to be reassessed, and we need to look at the possibility of changing this system. Let's harmonise it, yes, but let's improve it for everybody.
On behalf of the ECR, Mr. Seeler.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable Commissioner, there is no doubt that this is the key issue over this half a year here in Strasbourg to be discussed. Why? Because it's very popular with the citizens, and very many people are interested in this. This can be used as a pre-election campaign issue for the next elections. I am surprised that it is the Transport Committee that has submitted this proposal, because the investigation carried out in the Parliament does not show conclusive arguments for or against these kind of changes, that there would be extra expenses deriving from this. I was very surprised also that Mr. Swoboda said that a change of 1 hour has such a major impact on the health. So that means that those of us from Latvia who travel to Brussels every week would suffer from jet lag enormously on an everyday basis. So I would like us to be reasonable and either to come up with a decent study on this respect so that there would be conclusive arguments, or let's just put a stop to all of this discussion. Thank you.
Mrs. Meissner for the ALDE for 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, President. Commissioner, you're responsible for the time changes, summer and winter time, and you said you didn't want a sort of a patchwork across Europe. We don't want that. We want a sort of a uniform doing away with these new summertime arrangements. It was introduced in order to save energy, and indeed, energy saving 0.1, 0.5%. That's the result. I think that's a number of studies have shown. in the evenings, there's longer daylight, you save light, but you need, of course, in the morning for turning your lights on. I think there are a number of negative consequences that have been touched upon already as a result of these arrangements, and that's what we're talking about. And that's what worries people. What about the effect on climate? Because there's a greater emission of CO2 in the evenings. That is the case. So let me finish. And then when it comes to health, I think a lot of people are suffering health consequences. There's a long-term study by the health insurance funds. 50% people are sort of sick, or sick leave, greater depression. And of course, if you sleep less, then there are difficulties in concentrating, performance tails off in schools, and of course this affects a lot of young people. And of course, there's the impact on transport. We want to reduce the number of traffic accidents, but we can't do this with the current arrangement. And then what about animals? The milk yield is 10% lower in some areas. We all have an internal clock, all living organisms. It has to do with when the sun rises and goes down. And of course, we're interrupting these rhythms. Biochronological experts have shown the importance of these arrangements on human or animal organisms. There are 150 countries that have done away with these arrangements. Others have resumed these arrangements. In Russia, for example, there's been a decline in GDP as a result of these summertime arrangements. I mean, we should be more stupid or less intelligent than President Putin, so I think we need to reduce road traffic accidents. They're very important.
Madame, votre temps est...
Your time has expired. Thank you. González Peñas for the GUE.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. The clock change is subject to criticism and has been for some time, and it's clear many studies have demonstrated that energy savings today are marginal, and nevertheless there is a major impact on people's biorhythms, which can affect health. At the same time, it's also true that we all agree that enjoying more days of sunlight after work will improve our life quality. There are some countries, for example, where tourism improves when there are more daylight hours. Look at the holiday periods, for example, in the summer in the Mediterranean region. That is why we think an impact assessment, a far-reaching one, should be carried out on the impact of clock changes when it comes to health, work, energy consumption, and this across the European Union territories, taking into account that this is something that for some time already people have been saying is unnecessary and damaging.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Adeli for the Greens for 1 minute. Thank you very much. Commissioner, colleagues, for the transport sector, the change of the clocks, which occurs twice a year, has a double impact. First of all, there's a lack of sleep, which results in road safety issues. It is the cause of a large number of accidents involving the most vulnerable road users, and I'm thinking there of cyclists and pedestrians. And then there's a second important thing that is often forgotten. Transport of goods in Europe has to deal with the change, and this results in additional administrative burden. If we now add to that the fact that now it is a problem of public health, there are other negative effects on animals, for instance. I really think that we have enough arguments to vote in favour of this resolution from the Transport Committee to ask the Commission to deal with this, to eliminate time changes which are no longer relevant. And now Mr. Ciocca for the ENF.
As you see, it's 9:15. You can see from this clock, and I, like all citizens, Italian citizens, would want an assembly as important as the European Parliament here to talk about the 5 million Italian poor, the 4 million Italian unemployed, the dramatic problems as a result of clandestine migration and criminality. I think people want us to talk about these issues, but in rather ridiculous fashion. Here we are talking about should we abolish or not abolish summertime arrangements. So perhaps I can make a proposal to colleagues here within the European Parliament, and that is that we move the fingers of the clock an hour back, and that would mean savings for European citizens, for Italian citizens, of 250,000 euros that we could then give back to citizens. I think we should be talking about important issues, employment, clandestine migration, which continues. These are the issues that citizens want to see us taking up. The Americans are talking about taxes, defending borders, and here we are crazily talking about a pointless and nugatory issue that doesn't really interest Europe's citizens, and certainly not Italian citizens.
Mr. Epitideos for 1 minute.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Από το 1981, οπότε οι χώρες της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης εφαρμόζουν εναλλάξ την χειμώνα.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, there are a number of countries in the European Union that carry out clock changes in the summer and in the winter. And for a long time, we've been talking about whether or not this is a useful exercise. The wintertime hour is the real one, and the summertime arrangements are something that are artificially created by the member states to be able to make the most of summertime sunshine and daylight hours. But there are many people who are actually affected by this, depending on what activities they carry out. And some people believe that we have to maintain the biannual clock changes, and others would say the opposite. It is also claimed that the clock changes cause changes in people's sleeping patterns and damage or have adverse effects on public health. So I think it's important to think about this, because if you do away with the summer clock changes, that would cause disruptions in daily life of citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Commissioner. Yes, it is very clear that there are a lot of studies about this, and there are a lot of different opinions about summer and winter time. I think there are fewer accidents as a result of summertime, and I think that is something that we need to take into account. What we see in the alternative text is that the Commission, and as the Commissioner has just said, needs to balance the advantages and the disadvantages. It's not something that has to change overnight. There are a number of member states and a number of different regions, and we can only make a decision once we've had a study which has been carried out right across Europe, and we think that we need a really fundamental study so that we have all of the information that we need, and then we'll be able to tackle the issue. And I think the question, colleagues, isn't urgent. I really think that we have enough on our plate at the moment, and I think that we need to concentrate on our priorities. Thank you.
Parole maintenant à Madame.
Mrs. Kukulati for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Biannual changing clocks is a historical relic from the previous century. There was an attempt to bring about energy savings. Now we can see that energy savings are only marginal. Moving of clocks, changing clocks, have many negative consequences. We should not talk about ourselves only, about healthy MEPs who work a lot, but rather we should look at the inner clock of many people. We have seen that in many studies that it is difficult for people to adapt to the biannual change of clocks, especially small children, elderly people, and other vulnerable groups should be taken into consideration, because we have responsibility for them. If the change of 1 hour is significant, and the impact is different in the north and in the south, and this artificial changing of clocks once or twice a year is something that we can stop, because we are politicians who are responsibility. We have to bear responsibility for this decision how we had taken earlier. We hope that the Commission would make a clear-cut proposal to the Parliament and to the Council of changing the system. Each and every member state will be able to decide their own time zone. In future too, they will be able to decide whether they move the clocks or not. But nevertheless, we want to have a uniform decision concerning the whole of Europe. Either all countries stop this system, or if the majority does not want to stop the current system, then fair enough, but at least we want a proposal on it.
1 minute 30.
For 1 minute.
Sorry, I couldn't hear. Well, thank you. Welcome, Commissioner, and thank you, President. Yes, well, I think during my entire lifetime, I think this has come up. I think probably in most member states, you'll have heard this over the years, should we change the clocks or not? Just a point for good colleagues. As somebody who was formerly in the airline industry, believe me, jet lag isn't a clock moving forward or back 1 hour twice a year. Jet lag is something completely different, I must say. I think the original directive was quite logical in terms of harmonising the biannual change. So clearly, at least we changed the time at exactly the same time throughout Europe and throughout the European Union. I'm personally totally unconvinced by the scientific reports, which, quite frankly, are inconclusive. And furthermore, on the grounds of subsidiarity, this must be a member state decision and should not be a decision made by the European Union and imposed on member states. A proposed assessment by the Commission, in my view, is a complete waste of taxpayers' money at a time when there are far more important issues which we should be focusing upon in Europe, and I therefore, certainly on behalf of my delegation, we shan't be supporting, despite all of the hard work by colleagues, we shan't be supporting these proposals. Thank you very much.
La parole est pour 1 minute à Monsieur Torvalds.
Arvoisa puhemies.
Thank you, President. The Commission promised when it started its work that it would be big in big things and small in small things. Now it should prove that it can be also mediocre in mediocre things. Medium function at medium level in medium things. The further north you go, the bigger the impact of these changes are. I can tell you that in Utsjoki on the 26th of November, there was a sunset, and the next sunrise was the 16th of January. It was a very long night. If somebody believes that changing the clock 1 hour here or there in Utsjoki has an impact, well, welcome to reality. You have no reality check. You should have a reality check. If the sun doesn't set in Berlaymont, it does on the 17th of May, there's going to be a sunrise in Utsjoki, and then 26th of July, there's going to be the next sunset. If you think that you can have impact on that, then welcome to this world.
Pour 1 minute.
For 1 minute, Mr. Senra Rodriguez.
Obrigada, Presidenta. A senhora Comissária diz que os estudos não são...
Madam Commissioner, these studies are not conclusive, you've said that. But it's true that there are studies that point to adverse impacts on health, agriculture, road safety, and then the reduction of good quality sleep. I would recommend the precautionary principle be applied here in the interests of health, Madam Commissioner. I'd also like to say, Madam Commissioner, that summertime helps people enjoy leisure activities, and I think in order to promote that, we should reduce the working day and redistribute working hours better. When it comes to energy savings, one of the important arguments to justify these changes as one of the important arguments that has to be taken into account. Now, there are people in Galicia who really suffer thanks to or due to the geographical position vis-à-vis their latitude, but we are an hour ahead, in fact, of Germany and on the same timeline as the UK. So you have to take this into account when assessing this thing.
Mrs. Hel
Kiitos, arvoisa puhemies. Uskokaa tai älkää, mutta...
Thank you, President. You can believe it or not, but banana flies are also involved in our debate, because last year's Nobel Prize winners in medicine, Hall, Rosbus and Young, were investigating their 24 rhythm and inner clock of these flies, and they found out that the biological clock, also with us humans, is surprisingly accurate and sensitive. If we disturb it, it can have far-reaching consequences. Now this inner clock is being disturbed biannually by changing the clocks, and this causes many problems in health and sleeping problems. We have to get rid of this in the EU. We don't need any further investigations because there are many of these investigations already done. I sent you 60 different sources today, and the end result is particularly clear. There is no positive impact of the setting of the time, and there are many problems that are caused. Therefore, we should be guided by science and not by personal feelings.
I don't see Mrs. Mellon. In that case, we can go straight on to Mr. Korwin-Mikke for 1 minute.
Dziękuję. Cieszę się, że doszło do tej dyskusji.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I must say I welcome the fact that we're having this debate. Some 65 years ago, when the communist regime introduced summertime arrangements, I tried to explain at the time that it was totally futile. I didn't manage to convince anyway, but anyway, perhaps we might be able to this time round. I think member states can overcome some of these difficulties by having a school starting not at 8 o'clock but 9 o'clock. We can change our rhythms without necessarily changing sort of a summertime arrangements. I think we're talking about biological rhythms. I think twice a year we're upsetting those rhythms, introducing total chaos in the transport sector, in fact in all sectors, and we don't really know why that is the case, because in fact it changes absolutely nothing, these summertime arrangements. I'm convinced that changing the clock, it's rather like the introduction of the different calendar in the sort of revolutionary France, picked up later with the Soviet regimes elsewhere. But I think it's an attempt to change natural rhythms by artificial rhythms, and I think it should be destroyed.
Pour 1 minute 30.
Mr. Koch for 1 minute 30.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
Dear colleagues, there are 24 hours in a day, and that means that with summertime we're not gaining an extra hour. Arguments for changing clocks say that we'll have longer time for leisure in the evening, or that more people will go shopping after work and that will increase consumption. I simply don't understand these arguments. They are not in any sort of relationship to the negative impacts on health for many citizens. Now, there are some colleagues who think that there are more important issues to deal with than this changing of the time. But those who suffer from the changing of clocks would see things differently. They have to deal with a sleep disruption. And what about the people who are involved in road accidents because of their tiredness? All of these people would be grateful if we could get rid of this nonsense of changing the clocks. And for about 400 million people, they don't really mind whether we change the clocks or not. But there are 100 million who suffer from the change. And some of them suffer from a very extreme impact. And for 80% of people it won't make a change, but for 20% it will lead to a significant improvement. So let's get rid of this silly time changing.
Maintenant, à Madame Tsapardel pour 1 minute.
Mrs. Tsapardel for 1 minute.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. Dear colleague, let's look at the things from the right perspective. In the 2000, we talked about energy savings, but that argument is no longer valid, particularly when there are other forms of energy efficiency which have been largely rolled out in all of the member states of the European Union. Now, for the time being, the number of negative consequences actually outweigh the benefits for this practice. If you look at the different problems related to health, for instance, the increase in heart attacks for women and the elderly, and then there are 3 times more accidents on the road during the clock change periods. This also generates costs, and the administrative burden is significant for certain economic sectors, particularly within the transport and tourism sectors. I think we should do away with this game regarding clock changes because, for example, this could contribute to better planning for transport of goods and passengers. And the Commission, I would urge you to revise this directive. Thank you.
Pour une minute. Mr. Slukowski for 1 minute. Thank you, Madam President. There are not many subjects of this kind that give rise to such opposition in all member states. Our lifestyles, technologies are changing so quickly that these traditions that we've inherited from the beginning of the last century pose a certain number of problems, including in terms of the health consequences. Changing the clock is now part of our European legislation, but I think we need some kind of community action with a view to changing the situation. Of course, we will need to reflect upon whether summertime or wintertime would be more beneficial, and I think we'd also have to assess the costs of such an operation. So I think the Commission needs to take a good hard look at the situation and reflect upon the consequences of any changes. I do apologize for interrupting you, but you were speaking rather quickly and I have no other means of alerting you to that. Mr. Tarrant, you have 1 minute.
Monsieur Tarrant.
Merci, Madame President. It was about time to stop unhealthy practices in Europe, practices which cause harm to children, grown-ups and domestic animals. The practice which was invented to serve the interests of war economy, practice introduced by Tsar Nicholas II and Kaiser Wilhelm II. Practices loved by no less than Hitler and Stalin. So, what do we wait for? What is the problem? And let the common sense prevail, and let's accept that the laws of nature are more powerful than the laws made by man, even by women and men in this powerful parliament. And to those who believe that by changing time on our clocks, on our wrists, that's a shamanist way of thinking, that it can influence the sun to create more light. They are wrong. I'm sorry to say that. But for consolation for you, you will survive without summertime. Thank you.
C'est au tour de Madame Schreier.
I call Madam Schreier. You have 1 minute 30.
Voorzitter.
Chair, colleagues, 62% of people want to stop changing the heat. Many people suffer from the changing up. People have headaches or they feel unwell. I know these people, and families and businesses suffer as a result of the change of the clocks. And what about road accidents as well? And why is the European Union affecting citizens in this way? There are no energy savings as a result, and we have to decide to stick to one time, summertime or winter. And even the Nobel Prize laureates of last year focused on this, as did our research services. And in many other countries there are committees looking at this. It's something which is being studied in Poland, Finland, Estonia, and we're not just here for big companies, but also for families, for young children who are disrupted by the changes. And I've been talking to people, and they're saying it's very easy to change computers, and so we're talking here of it. And I think this is something which we should take in light of a better legislation, and we need to do something for citizens. Here. Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Detjen, you have 1 minute.
Oui, je vous en prie.
Ja, sehr geehrte Frau
President, Commissioner, the natural rhythm of human beings is determined by when the sun goes down. The current EU regulations on summertime doesn't take that into account, but the studies that have been carried out show no positive health benefits. So I think we should call on the scientific community to put forward the evidence justifying the need to keep summertime arrangements. Natural biorhythms are more important than industry's concerns. I think in the 70s and 80s it might have been justified because Europe was divided up into different time zones. And of course, in terms of functioning of the industry, that caused problems. But I think we need to place greater emphasis on human health and listen to the inner clock. We now need to find a solution that's acceptable to our inner clock. And this isn't really sort of a carnival ploy, but I think these requests need to be taken seriously. Thank you. Mr. Skrelec, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Commissioner, dear colleagues, I have the impression that we could go on discussing this issue for days, and it would be difficult to say if an important study is in favor or against changing clocks. But we can ask ourselves one question. When the directive we're discussing today was adopted, were there public consultations with the citizens? Were they consulted on whether clocks should be changed? The directive was simply adopted. So we could ask on the basis of which decision did other countries in the world base this decision. Was this decision stupid or was it wise? And are we stupid or wise if we want to keep the current state of affairs? And finally, should we wait for a citizens' initiative to have 1 million signatures for the Commission and the Parliament to start debating this issue as something relevant? Thank you.
Mr. Kunin, you have 1 minute.
Madam President, if now the Commission were to make a proposal for a directive suggesting that we set time twice a year, I believe that we would oppose it completely. It would be taken as a ridiculous suggestion. The time has passed such proposals altogether. We know that at the time the idea was to save energy by changing clocks. Energy efficiency and technology have developed hugely from those times, and now we know that we don't achieve such energy savings. But on the other hand, many investigations prove that there are many disadvantages for human health, agriculture, traffic safety, transport. There are many of these sectors. If we think how useful and important this directive today is, we have to look at the advantages and the disadvantages that it brings. We are here presenting that we need further studies and investigations. We know that this has been investigated internationally in different member states for years, and now we should take a decision to repeal the directive. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Liberadzki, you have 1 minute.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani przewodnicząca.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. Madam Commissioner, you've given us the following choice. The first scenario is that we should have the same time across EU territories. Fine. Second scenario is that we either keep the status quo or we have a change. So if we want to change something, then we have to say very clearly that we're just talking about winter time here. Imagine if it were 8 o'clock in the morning, summertime, in Brussels, but actually it would be dark. The situation in Tallinn, however, is very different, in Warsaw as well, but in Brussels it's still dark then. Now, there are lots of arguments here, but they don't really bring much to the table, and there's no point talking about what Stalin did or talking about fruit flies. I don't think that really helps. But when it comes to transport, winter time offers a clear advantage. That is, there are fewer accidents because people set off later in the day. Then there was another argument. Somebody held up a clock, changing it from 9:15 to 8:15, but actually it'd be 10:15.
Mr. Liberadzki, would you accept a blue card from Ms. Hautala? Mr. Liberadzki, do you agree? With pleasure. Ms. Hautala.
Thank you very much. Vice President Liberadzki, I talked about the banana flies, fruit flies, I think it's in English. And why I did it is because the Nobel Medicine Prize winners, they concluded that the internal bioclock of banana flies is not that different from that of the humans. So would you be prepared to study that result and maybe take some conclusions from that? So would you then agree that maybe fruit flies are relevant for this discussion?
Monsieur Liberatsky, avez-vous une réponse?
Mr. Liberatsky, can you answer all that?
Dziękuję bardzo, pani wiceprzewodnicząca.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. And thank you, Vice President Hautala, for that. Well, what was my aim with this? Well, first of all, yes, I do want to take into account all of these analyses. But actually, I'd just like to refocus the debate on serious arguments. That is, regarding the unity of the European Union and taking into account the fact that certain historical arguments are obsolete, they no longer are valid. And then finally, wintertime, this was my point, wintertime is the correct time because soon we'll be changing back to summertime, so it's too late to do anything this year.
Mr. Langen, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. When I hear all of the terrible scenarios that are being described, in the US there's been a very long-term study which says that it reduces problems rather than increasing them, and people need sunlight, and the sunlight is there just for the same amount of time. And Mr. Liberatsky said that the sun only rises at 8 o'clock, but it's going dark at 10 o'clock at night. So we need to check all of these arguments, and that is why I agree with the proposal which has been made. And why aren't we talking here about the full moon? At home, I hear that 25% of people suffer 12 times a year from the full moon. They're not able to sleep. And then if we look at where tropism is occurring, it's where there is no sunlight. And we really should take this opportunity to help people, give people 1 extra hour of sunshine. So for that reason, we shouldn't change.
We move on now to Catch the Eye. Mrs. Shochova.
Vous êtes inscrite, ne vous inquiétez pas.
Děkuji za udělení slova, kolegyně.
Why, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Colleagues, at home and in the European Parliament, we get very agitated about the time changes, but the citizens should know that we do not spend more than an hour in plenary on this. We spend much more time on economic, social and security issues. Whereas these time changes worry many citizens indeed, and we are obliged to be concerned with their concerns. We have to acknowledge that there are no apparent energy savings, but that the time change does have an impact on citizens' health. Of course, there are people who want to spend more time outside in the summer, in their free time. I am among those. I also like playing tennis until 9 o'clock p.m. In the summertime, but then again, I can't get the extra time in the mornings anyway. So I am in favor of us considering health as the supreme argument here, and that we support the resolution calling for an abolition of summertime. Thank you.
Monsieur Caputo.
Mr. Caputo.
Monsieur Caputo.
Grazie.
Thank you, President. Scientific studies on the EU arrangements when it comes to summertime haven't reached any definitive conclusion, but they have highlighted the existence of negative effects on human and animal health and on security, road security. I think citizens' initiatives have highlighted concerns when it comes to the twice yearly clock changes. So I think there seem to be negative consequences. There seem to be economic advantages, but I think the debate is open. I don't think the studies carried out are conclusive, and I'm not convinced by a certain number of points that have been put forward. And then what about contradictions with the EU's climate and energy policies? I think given the very mixed results. I think the European Parliament should really only speak out on the basis of robust scientific evidence. So I think we should ensure that the directive is implemented in all member states, not some of them, and only subsequently possibly come forward with any possible or suggested changes. Thank you, Mr. Caputo. Mr. Myers.
Thank you very much indeed. Studies show that clock changes have an impact on health, transport and industrial activity, and the cost of energy at the same time is not reduced. People at work are affected. However, we have more time for leisure activities, and we can make the most of more daylight and sunshine. Obviously, it depends on the geographic situation of the country concerned. The countries that are closer to the equator don't necessarily want to change their timing arrangements because of where they are, but we should be more flexible. Look at Brazil, for example. The changes there only come about in the southern part of the country and not in the rest of the country. So to avoid these different problems, I think it's important to respect the principle of subsidiarity and let the member states make the choice that is most fitting for them, whilst taking into account the geographical situation of each country. That's more reasonable.
Ms. Votmans, I think you're a bit concerned there, but your name is down on the list, and I do now give you the floor.
Thank you very much. We hear that there are a lot of problems. We hear about all of the difficulties resulting from the change, but the Commission seems to be saying that this is balanced through the advantages, and if we got rid of some summertime, then we would have a less light, less time for sitting out on a terrace with your friends or playing in the garden with your friends. But if we get rid of winter time, but that isn't an opposite, because that means for 5 months of the year in the morning, children are going to school in the dark, and that's not safe. And so I think if we take all of that into account, we need to use our common sense and stick to the current system.
Ko poslušam to razpravo, gre očitno za vprašanje, ki povzroča zelo različne poglede, tudi take, da gre za
Thank you, Madam President. I think it's quite clear that there are very differing views on the subject under discussion. For some, this is really not an important topic at all when compared with the real concerns besetting Europe's citizens. But I think recently, or more recently, Europe's citizens are speaking out on the subject. But we have heard that there are really no reasons for changing the clock, and we've heard also that there are negative consequences when it comes to road transport, human health, or administrative red tape. But I think it's important that we air the differing viewpoints on the issues and that we take into account scientific evidence. But I think we need to think of our natural rhythms, biorhythms, rather than artificial ones, because sooner or later I think we'll reap the negative consequences of that. Mr. Balzer, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. Switching of the clock is disturbing the harmony between the internal clock of people. It might take 4 to 14 days to switch over or to get out of the detrimental effects, whereas the energy savings are less and less. In many countries there have been initiatives to do away with the switch over. In the Hungarian parliament, for instance, our party initiated this, but the majority is not in favor of this because it requires EU harmonization. Now we can start this harmonization. One more remark. Many of us who are talking about the benefits of the summertime look at a single solution, saying that the winter is the winter time which we're going to retain, which is not true. Even the Commissioner said that it's the summertime which we are going to retain if we have a single.
McGuinness.
Thank you, Madam President. It was worth getting up early for this debate because I've learned about banana flies and all sorts of very interesting things that I really didn't know about. But can I just, because this is an issue that people are interested in, I got volumes of comments. So let me read you a few. Tommy Donnelly. We tried this before, about 40 years ago, to change. Before we start, maybe someone should discover why this change was discarded. If it wasn't practical then, it may not be practical now. On the other hand, Patrick Brennan, yes, please change this ridiculous change. It would be most welcome in industries such as pharma, especially where standalone instrumentation might be used and which might not be synchronised to a network clock, one less nuisance and data integrity headaches. And then Riona Meehan, we're divided in this house. My husband, a farmer, wants the time to continue to change for winter and summer. On the other hand, I don't want my children coming home in the dark and going to school in the dark. So I was going to suggest maybe a referendum, but we might get a very close result, and that might be dangerous. Thank you.
Madame Grappini, maintenant.
Ms. Grappini now.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. Madam Commissioner, now, obviously here we have set out our views, and I think it's important to speak on behalf of our citizens. I come from industry, and it's very difficult if you work 3 shifts to have a clock change, and then you're delayed at work. Then it's difficult for the children, and then you have to change all the clocks at home. I don't think here in the European Union we should all have the same time. No, I'm in Romania. When I go to another country, I change the clocks. I think that's normal. And then we heard about biorhythms from the other colleagues. You cannot dictate that, you know, the body should adapt one day and then change the next. I support this, and I think we should have a uniform hour in the European Union. Thank you.
Auken.
Ms. Auken.
Thank you, Madam President. I think this is an important debate. I've heard about fruit flies and health, and if changing for 1 hour twice a year creates big health problems, then let's campaign to stop all travel east to west. It would be much more dangerous than people realize. We should be ill, all of us. There should be nothing but sick people here because we change twice a week. But I love summertime. Those long, light evenings where we can work longer, we can sit outside, enjoy it with friends. It's not only in Denmark, it's really fantastic in Denmark. I've seen it in Holland, I've seen it in Norway, even though the sun doesn't really set up there. I've even seen it here in Strasbourg. Then on a warm, long summer evening, you can enjoy it. And to think that it could just be free to take away these evenings from people, don't do that, don't do that. Let's keep it.
Give the floor to Mr. Faria.
Senhora Presidente, muito obrigado. Senhora Comissária, a hora de verão foi introduzida pela primeira vez há mais de 100 anos.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Summertime was introduced over 100 years ago, and it was possible then to reconcile a private and professional life. But now, in this debate, we're talking about the disadvantages of changing the clocks. And I think that a number of evaluations, even if they have different views, haven't given us a conclusive view. And so for that reason, I think we need to take into account the disruption to people's biorhythms, but also it's leading to problems with people's cardiac rhythms as well. And so perhaps this is something which should be left to member states. But in that case, you would have differing times. But there are 3 time zones within the EU.
Mr. Hetman.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani przewodnicząca. Ja także uważam, że ta debata.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, I too think that this debate is very important because this is an issue that is very close to our citizens' hearts. I'm not going to rehash all of the arguments that we've heard because I think everything's already been mentioned. Issues related to health, the economy. Everybody who has spoken in this debate has set out a whole series of arguments. So now, our job is to try to overcome the political divisions on this. It's not something we see often in the Parliament, but we have to do that. European citizens want to see the abolition of the clock changes. Now, there are lots of initiatives that have been launched in different member states. So, my question is, what are we waiting for? Let's get rid of these changes. Thank you.
And finally, Mr. Grzyb.
Skoro tak wiele społeczeństw, badania opinii publicznej na tym pokazują to, że rośnie...
Well, according to recent opinion polls, I think it's clear that there's growing support within society to put an end to these clock changes twice a year. So I think we do need to resolve this issue. It's not a question which time we're going to choose. Is it going to be summertime or winter time? That's not the issue. I think we've just got to put an end to these biannual changes. I think there have been a number of parliamentary initiatives, Finland, Poland, for example, and we, in Poland, for example, have found we can do nothing because we would have to change the directive at EU level. But I think there is growing support within society, social reasons for putting an end to the current arrangements. But we're seeing the impact on health so widespread, and we can't just ignore those effects. That brings us to the end of Catch the Eye. Commissioner, you have the floor to conclude the debate.
Honourable Madam President, honourable members of the Parliament, I really welcome the debate and your different suggestions. But let me shortly get back to a few of the points. First of all, let me stress again that the time shift has to be coordinated through EU rules. Uncoordinated national time change in the course of the year would create very important problems for the good functioning of our internal market, notably in the transport sector. So, if we ever decide to stop changing the clock, it has to be done throughout the EU in a synchronised and unified manner. Regarding health problems, it is true that the body has to adapt to the time change in March and October. Some people are more vulnerable and have more issues with the change than others. That is true. On the other hand, as some of you pointed out, other studies show that longer exposure to daylight and more opportunities for leisure and sport have a positive effect on people's health. Whether these gains compensate the disturbance remains unclear. But I can see that this is an important topic to you and the citizens that you represent. So I'm very much looking forward to the vote in the resolution later today. Thank you very much.
À cet égard, nous avons reçu deux propositions de résolution.
We've received two draft resolutions, so we can close this debate now, and we'll have a vote on this today. Now we've got the debates on cases of breaches of human rights, democracy and the rule of law. And according to Rule 135 of our rules, we'll have this debate now, and we'll begin with the debate on Russia, the case of Oyub Titiev and the human